When I moved into my small apartment building, I was excited to finally live on my own. The building was old but quiet, with only 6 apartments and mostly older residents who kept to themselves. My apartment was 3A, and directly across the hallway was 3B. I noticed immediately that the door to 3B was always closed. The curtains always drawn, and the hallway light near it was constantly flickering. The landlord mentioned that someone lived there, but they worked nights and preferred not to be disturbed. At first, that didn't bother me. I was usually busy with work and rarely paid attention to my neighbors anyway. But about a week after moving in, strange things started happening. Every night around 2:30 a.m., I would hear slow footsteps in the hallway. They were heavy and dragged slightly, like someone walking while half asleep. The strange part was that the footsteps would stop directly outside my door and remain there for several minutes. The first time it happened, I thought maybe my neighbor was just drunk or confused about which apartment was theirs. But when I opened the door, the hallway was completely empty. No one. The second night, the same thing happened again. Slow footsteps. A pause outside my door. Silence. This time I looked through the peephole instead of opening the door. I saw a tall man standing with his back toward my door, facing the wall. He wasn't moving at all. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and he wore a dark coat that looked far too heavy for indoors. I waited for him to move, but he just stood there. After about 5 minutes, he slowly turned and walked back into apartment 3B. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me, so I asked the landlord about my neighbor. His expression changed instantly. He told me the man in 3B had lived there for years and rarely spoke to anyone. Some tenants had complained about strange noises before, but nothing serious enough to evict him. Still, the landlord warned me not to bother him. That night, I tried to ignore the situation, telling myself I was overreacting. But at exactly 2:30 a.m., the footsteps returned. This time they were slower, and they stopped closer to my door than before. When I looked through the peephole again, the man was standing there. But this time he wasn't facing the wall. He was facing my door, and somehow he was looking directly through the peephole. The moment I saw as I pressed against the peephole from the other side, my entire body froze. It felt impossible, like he somehow knew I was watching him.
I stepped back quietly, trying not to make any sound.
For several minutes,
I stood in the middle of my living room,
barely breathing. Eventually, the footsteps slowly walked away again, and I heard the door, the 3B, close with a quiet click. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just paranoia. Maybe he had simply turned. I noticed other strange details about my neighbor. He never left during the daytime. I worked from home for part of the week, and I never once heard his door open while the sun was out. Yet late at night, I could hear him moving furniture, dragging something heavy across the floor, or occasionally tapping on the walls like he was measuring something. One night, the tapping happened directly on the wall we share between our apartments. It started slowly. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. At first I ignored it, but then curiosity got the best of me. I knocked back once. Immediately the tapping stopped. For about 30 seconds there was complete silence. Then, suddenly, a loud bang hit the wall so hard that a picture frame in my apartment fell to the floor. That scared me enough to stop interacting completely. But things only got worse. A few nights later, around the same time as always, I heard the footsteps. Again, except this time they didn't stop at my door. They kept going past it and stopped near my bedroom window. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and the window faced an alley with no fire escape. Nearby, confused, I walked slowly toward the bedroom. The curtains were slightly open, and when I looked outside, my heart nearly stopped. The man from apartment 3B was standing in the alley below, staring directly up at my window. That man, he had left his apartment, walked all the way downstairs, and positioned himself perfectly so he could watch me from outside. At that point, I knew something was seriously wrong. The next day, I decided to talk to another tenant in the building, an older woman who had lived there for nearly 10 years. When I mentioned apartment 3B, her face turned pale. She hesitated before telling me something that made my stomach drop, according to her. The man in 3B used to live there with his younger brother. About 6 years earlier, the brother had disappeared without any explanation. The police came and asked questions, but nothing was ever proven. So the case eventually went cold. After that, the man became even more reclusive. Some tenants believed the brother simply ran away. Others thought something much darker had happened inside that apartment. That story alone made me uncomfortable, but what happened later that night terrified me. Around 2:30 a.m., the footsteps returned again. But this time, there were two different sets of footsteps in the hallway. One sounded like the slow, dragging steps I was used to hearing. The other sounded lighter, faster, almost like someone pacing nervously. I crept toward the door and looked through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. The man from 3B was standing there again, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, further down the hallway, there was another figure. It looked thin and hunched, its face hidden in the shadows. The man slowly raised his hand and knocked on my door 3 times. The exact same pattern I had heard through the wall before. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks again. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure they could hear it. Then the man leaned closer to the door and spoke in a quiet voice that sounded almost amused. He knows you can hear us. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, the 2 sets of footsteps slowly walked back toward apartment 3B. The next morning, I packed everything I owned and moved out that same day. Weeks later, I returned briefly to collect a package that had been delivered to my old address. The landlord told me something strange had happened the night after I left. Police had been called because of a horrible smell coming from apartment 3B. When they forced the door open, the apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, just bare floors and walls, except for one thing scratched repeatedly into the hallway wall between our apartments. 2 sets of tally marks, counting every night someone had lived in 3A.